The time has come. After a lot of thought, I feel I can confidently rank Haruki Murakami's books in order of how much I enjoy them. When I say confidently, I mean that I am confident that this is how I feel about them right now, but just like with any other author or director or musician I love, these rankings are subject to change depending on how recently I've read them. For now though, this is where I'm at, so let's get right to it. First category is called Good Job, Good Effort. These are books that I didn't hate, but have had little to no lasting impact on me. Consider them at the bottom of the barrel, even though the barrel is pretty shallow. First up is Sputnik Sweetheart. This one is at the bottom because I can barely even remember what it was about. I can recall vague ideas about a mysterious missing woman and a suitcase, but in all honesty, it feels like my brain just sort of took some common Murakami-isms and approximated a plot. Like if you fed all of Murakami's novels to an AI and told it to write a new one. Not that this book is just a hodgepodge of random tropes from his career, but it didn't leave a strong enough impression on me to put it any higher on the list. Next we have Hear the Wind Sing / Pinball 1973. It was kind of a cool experience to read his earliest work, but these felt pretty insignificant compared to the rest of his catalog. What I took away the most after reading these is that you can see what his style would evolve into even in his first two stories. That sort of ennui feeling is there, and he's already writing about doing mundane tasks, so you know he's on the right track. Okay, here we have the next tier of quality, which I've named Pretty Good. These books are all, pretty good. The books in this category could be swapped around in any order and I wouldn't complain too much about the new ranking. They all fall squarely in the this is a solid book category, but not great enough to be in the VIP sections. First up is After Dark. After Dark has a cool concept where the whole book takes place over the course of one night, and I think it's a fun little vignette. I've seen challenges online where you're supposed to try and read the whole thing in one sitting to mirror the experiences in the book, so try that on for size if you're a marathoner. Some might call this one of his more boring ones, but I think it's well worth the read. Sitting slightly higher, we have South of the Border, West of the Sun. This one has a number of familiar tropes, but the most noticeable one is that there's a mysterious woman who the main character is reconnecting with. This is one of his shorter ones, and sometimes I wish he would write more of them like this. Not too much happens, but the atmosphere is enveloping, and the romance between the two main characters is compelling in a way that is lacking sometimes in his other books. A good sit and read by the fireplace type of book. Right near the midpoint of the pile is Colorless, Tsukuru, Tazaki, and His Years of Pilgrimage. I have to admit that I have some bias towards Colorless because I read it at a very strange time in my life and it felt like a nice anchor to hold on to, so I probably like it more than most people. I like that it's set in a very modern world, and you see Murakami tackling the idea of human relationships in tandem with the existence of Facebook. It's not overbearing, but the presence of modern technology makes the story feel more grounded in the real world. Sometimes this stuff can get pretty esoteric, and so having a pretty straightforward story in a more ordinary seeming world is a nice change of pace. If you're feeling a little separated from the world, or you've been putting off some reconnecting with people you've drifted from, this is a nice little story to dive into. Also, totally gorgeous hardcover version in the US. The last spot on our pretty good list is Murakami's most recent novel, Killing Commendatore. To be honest, I didn't know what to do with this one, so it's landing a little ways back from his best efforts. I think it's one of Murakami's most ambitious novels, but it's also kind of a mess, especially at the end. Very cool concept though, and I will definitely read it again at some point. I also have a soft spot for it because it was the first Murakami novel that I got to experience as a new release. It was fun going to the bookstore that day and swooping up a copy. If you're interested in this one, I would probably just read Wind-Up Bird Chronicle first, since that's the better, more classic version of this. Alrighty, we are now entering the great tier. These books are really memorable, rereadable, but not quite the cream of the crop. First up we have Dance, Dance, Dance. When I was figuring out the order for the list, I kind of surprised myself with how high this one rose from my initial rankings. It's just a really fun detective novel, and it has this light, breezy feeling to it that his other novels lack for the most part. It's also wild to me that he decided to write a fourth book in the Rat series just for the hell of it. It almost feels like a fan fiction continuation, but in a really good way. If you ever decided to go and write a fifth entry, I wouldn't be mad at it. We're going to take a brief detour from the ranked list to give a special shout out to Underground. This book doesn't really count for the rankings since it's not a novel, but I wanted to give a special shout out to his nonfiction book, which chronicles the experiences of those who were affected by the Tokyo gas attack in 1995. You can tell that the tragedy of it all really affected him, and it's also really neat to see him playing more of a journalistic role than a storyteller. It can be a bit repetitious at times, but it's a fascinating piece of history and well worth your time. Okay, back to the list. Next up we have A Wild Sheep Chase. A pretty singular work in Murakami's bibliography. It's about a dude looking for a sheep. It's amazing. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just perfect in its own little way. It's not very long, but it feels like the complete package. Some of the ones I have marked higher on this list are a little more ambitious, but there's something about Wild Sheep Chase that just sings. I recommended this one to a friend who had never read Murakami, and I think they were a little lost in the beginning since it drops you straight into the rap verse, but I think most people should be able to read this just fine without reading Wind Pinball. Next is Norwegian Wood. This book is really, really sad, but it's that good sad. Another one of Murakami's more grounded works, but even with the fantastical elements, it still has that mysterious, surreal quality about it. It's a bummer that the film adaptation wasn't that good because it could have been a really beautiful thing, but at least we got some Johnny Greenwood tracks out of it. This is also the novel that propelled Murakami to international stardom, so if you're looking for a starting point, this isn't a bad one to go with. It's a great wintertime read, so I think I might be cracking this one open again sometime soon. The last spot on this list before we get into the truly incredible stuff is Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World. Some may wonder why I have Hardboiled so high up on this list, but I think that it's one of his most criminally underrated novels. The setting is completely unique to the rest of his books, and the dual narrative is compelling in that way that makes you want to keep reading because you want to know what happens next in story A or story B. I feel like Stefan whenever I have to describe it. If you like surreal fantasy, then I have a book for you. It's got unicorns, human computers, and chunky secretaries wearing pink. For real though, this one is pretty incredible, and I hope that at some point he dives back into fantasy in the way that he explored it in this book. Our final tier is aptly titled God Tier. These are the books that make Murakami a legend, and the ones that I've reread the most and look forward to reading again the most. In third place we have Kafka on the Shore. We've reached the God tier Murakami books, which means that this is where shit gets real weird real fast. Kafka on the Shore has a whole lot going on, and it's all completely bizarre. It starts out with some paranormal activity, and then dives into possible patricide, a man speaking cat language, raining fish, etc., etc. When I think of reading Murakami, or if I ever have to describe it to someone, I often say that his books at their best feel like a fever dream. This one achieves that feeling and then some. Dreamlike is often thrown around when describing Murakami's works, and this one really does operate in that space. I read this one a couple of times, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. Hopefully I can get my hands on that awesome Folio Society edition that came out recently. In a very close second place we have The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I've done a video about this book before where I go into more detail, but wow, what a banger of a book. This was the first Murakami that I ever read, and I credit this book for turning me into the avid reader that I am today. A friend loaned me his copy a number of years back when I wasn't in the best place, and I remember slowly making my way through it and realizing how special what I was reading really was. His style is perfectly on pitch here, and the best passages feel like you're in a deep meditation. It's one of those things where not a whole lot even happens, but it feels like so much packed into one book. It also has one of my favorite passages from any of his books, in which an aging veteran describes the war crimes he witnessed during Japan's campaign in Manchuria. That section of the book is about as frightening and horrific as Murakami has ever gotten, and it serves as a perfect example of how effective his little tangents can be. Depending on what day it is, this might be my number one. It certainly means the most to me out of all of them. And finally, we have 1Q84. This might be a hot take, but this one just might be my favorite. For a book that was seen as somewhat of a letdown upon release, it certainly deserves a whole lot more credit than it gets. It's by far Murakami's longest novel, and even though not everything hits 100% of the time, you just have to applaud the ambition. The length of the novel added to the experience for me, as you're living with these characters in this world for so long that it becomes disorienting in the way that a world should when there's two moons up in the sky. It's also one of the rare opportunities where we get to see Murakami deal with a woman as a lead character. The story bouncing back and forth between Tengo and Aomame is magnetic, and the antagonizing forces of the book are pretty out there even by Murakami standards. It really feels like the end of the world is at stake, in as surreal a fashion as it could be. I don't think we'll ever get a Hollywood adaptation or otherwise, but I am begging HBO Max to pick it up as a miniseries and let Hiro Murai do it. People often clamor for a Lynchian adaptation of his work, and I think Murakami has said as much in terms of his approval of the idea, but I think the atmosphere that Murai captures in Atlanta and other projects he's worked on would match this world perfectly. This book may be a behemoth, but I'd read it again in a heartbeat. For me, a 10 out of 10. What a weird world. Okay, there it is. My definitive, unquestionable ranked list of Murakami novels. I have a feeling that I might be pulling one off the shelf again sometime soon, so maybe I'll see you again in the near future for a deeper dive on one of these masterpieces. Time for some product placement. I also want to give a quick plug for the Murakami stickers that I designed that are available on redbubble.com. I will leave a link in the description for anyone who's interested. Thanks!